Salutations, wonderful people. It has recently, well, if recently applies to a few weeks or maybe even a month ago, I've come to realize that America currently in the 2020s relates in great amounts to that of America in the 1920s. I'm not entirely sure if this is the same for other countries. I would not consider myself an expert in world history, but it certainly is in America. Also, disclaimer, I am not a historian, but I am passionate about American history and study and or read about it profusely and therefore deem myself qualified. A majority of what I say is correct and has been fact-checked multiple times, yet if I make any mistakes, feel free to correct me. And if any mistakes are made, I do apologize in advance. Moving right along, you may ask, what were the 1920s like in America, and how did they relate to current American society? Or perhaps, how is that even possible? In order to understand my point, we must delve deeper into America in the 1920s, also known as the Roaring Twenties. If you are wondering, like I myself did at one point before I had to write about it for an essay on my test, why the Roaring Twenties were roaring, I shall offer the best explanation possible. One can perceive it either as roaring as in a fun and exciting party, or roaring like a fire raging on, causing discomfort and chaos. A perfect example of life during the Roaring Twenties for the wealthier class of Americans is the Great Gatsby musical, based off F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby, which is also a brilliant example. Now, historically speaking, the 2020s and 1920s both started out similarly, yet still somewhat different. Beginning with the 1920s, they began subsequent to World War I, lasting from 1914 to 1918, with Democrat Woodrow Wilson in office. President Wilson is certainly not one of my favorite presidents, yet I will try not to let that affect any of the information I relay on to you. He assumed the presidency in 1913, becoming the 28th president, and stepped down when his second term ended in 1921. Wilson was not popular amongst the American people and only got elected due to the Electoral College. He was also considered one of the three Progressive-era presidents, along with Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. During his time in office, there were certainly rather suspicious things going on. In October of 1919, Wilson suffered a massive stroke and was incompetent to serve America as its president. His wife, First Lady Edith Wilson, unconstitutionally ran the nation while her husband was incapacitated. Few knew of this, only a cabinet member or two, and the public was prohibited from entering the White House, especially newspaper writers and other forms of media. Another key aspect of the Roaring Twenties was Prohibition. Prohibition was the ban of manufacture, distribution, sale, and consumption of alcoholic beverages, made official by the 18th Amendment of the Constitution, later repealed during the administration of the 32nd President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Literally everyone despised it, except for various religious groups or just groups in general. It was very unpopular and got passed only because Congress had a majority of members who supported the Prohibition cause. Why? Why would someone support the Prohibition cause? Some people thought that consumption of alcohol led people to be evil. To be fair, if one becomes inebriated to the point they may go mad and do reckless things, Ollie Roosevelt, if you want to find out yourself, look him up, otherwise that shall be covered in a separate video, if you insist, that would be considered evil. Yet some of the greatest people in American and world history consumed alcohol, including presidents such as George Washington, James Madison, Theodore Roosevelt, the well-known automobile manufacturer Henry Ford, who was not president, and, quite frankly, a majority of beloved historical figures. I honestly don't think it made them evil people, but it's all a matter concerning gluttony or temperance and the matter of which you consume alcohol, and, of course, if you are legally allowed to consume it. Prohibitionist ideals have been around ever since the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, yet didn't reach the federal level until 1919 with the 18th Amendment. Then, the Volstead Act was passed the same year, officially beginning the proceedings of Prohibition. People still managed to get their hands on alcohol by going to speakeasies, from illegal dealers, smuggling, from doctors who had been granted medicinal whiskey or brandy, or even made their own. The unfortunate aspect was the alcohol obtained by the black market or from those who made it by hand. the quality decreased, resulting in death, with an estimated 5,000 people dying due to poorly made alcohol during this time period. Two major conflicting issues that arose due to Prohibition were whether or not these proceedings were constitutional and the rise of organized crime. Since alcohol was, in pretty vague terms, banned, religious groups were unable to use alcohol, specifically wine, for services, such as the Catholics and Jews for some of their traditions. This therefore violated the First Amendment to the Constitution guaranteeing religious freedom. The certain groups were able to obtain the necessary alcohol, promoting gray areas to multiply in the 18th Amendment, since there were many gray areas to begin with. Organized crime also flourished during Prohibition, with infamous gangsters such as Al Capone and the rise of Irish, Jewish, and Italian crime families. They bootlegged alcohol, causing riots and violence, and some became wealthy due to selling the alcohol they made or bootlegged. Then, what I personally knew the Roaring Twenties by before I learned it in depth, the flapper became a part of society. A flapper was a woman, called the New Woman by some, that was characterized by short hair styled in a bob that crossed gender boundaries at the time, shapeless dresses falling scandalously below the knee, considerably more freedom than an average woman, and the partaking in masculine activities such as drinking, smoking, and even occasionally politics. As you can see by now, I love air quotation marks. They were deemed obscene by many, and here is a picture of a flapper so that you may see for yourself. Okay, that's enough of that. Can we get back to politics? Yes, we shall. Subsequent to President Wilson stepping down in 1921, Warren G. Harding of the Republican Party assumed the presidency. Harding served from 1921 to 1923 and was elected due to his campaign slogan, "Return to Normalcy." Americans at the time would love to restore to this said normalcy since World War I and the progressivism of three prior presidents, particularly Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt. Harding was from Ohio and was a well-groomed and genial man. His close acquaintances thought he looked and acted like a natural-born leader. President Harding, like a majority of Republicans at the time, believed in pro-big business, anti-tax, and laissez-faire economics. It is quite a fancy name, and I love saying it. Laissez-faire economics is when the federal government does not intervene with matters of regulating business and the economy. Americans favor this over the strict regulations of Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, especially Mr. Teddy Roosevelt, who destroyed party bosses, political machines, and big business tycoons like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. This gave Americans more freedom, bankers and financiers more power, and created a time of mass spending. The economy was flourishing. Oh, darling, it's a dream. Maybe if Harding had lived to finish his first term, he may have had a chance at a second if it wasn't for a scandal ensuing. The scandal was the Teapot Dome scandal, which was when, due to Harding's anti-regulation policies, the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Navy accepted bribes from various individuals to drill on federal land near Teapot Dome, Wyoming in 1923. Despite the fact he was never involved, the president was aware of the scandal yet did nothing about it. When Moore had found out about this affair, Harding was to be impeached subsequent to trial, yet he suffered from a heart attack and died before the trial. Republicans in office. There were 3 during this time, and the next one is Calvin Coolidge. Subsequent to Warren G. Harding's death, Calvin Coolidge became president. Coolidge was a considerably more conservative man than Harding, who he succeeded, and gained the nickname Silent Cal due to his few doings during his administration and strong belief in laissez-faire. Coolidge served the rest of Harding's term and got re-elected due to the booming economy, serving from 1923 to 1929. He was big on neutrality and supported racial equality. He also passed the Dawes Plan that stated Germany could pay off war debt fines with American bank loans to France and Great Britain. It made huge profits until the stock market crash of 1929. He was also the first president to use media such as the radio and motion pictures. And yet, historians cannot judge his presidency properly due to his lack of involvement in executive policies, so to speak, but he certainly was admired by a majority of Americans at the time due to the success of the economy. As shown in history and various elections, when the economy is good, people praise the president for success, and when the economy is bad, they blame the president. There honestly isn't that much else to say about Calvin Coolidge, but there certainly is for the next few presidents. The 31st president, Herbert Hoover, was also a Republican and also believed in laissez-faire economics. Hoover served from 1929 to 1933. He was a wealthy businessman prior to serving in office and certainly was prosperous. Hoover had an estimated $4 million of wealth by 1914, equivalent to $125 million in today's economy. He was even known as the greatest man of his time by some people, but unfortunately, not for long. An economic crisis had been going on for some time, especially with farmers. During World War I, American farmers prospered since farmers of other countries were off fighting in the war. They sold goods across the Atlantic and made massive profits. But as soon as the war ended and the other farmers returned to their jobs, American farmers did not make nearly as much money. They had also taken out loans during World War I to pay for seeds and other agricultural needs, expecting to make a lot more money than they did after the war, and were unable to pay off the loans, then falling in debt. Also, due to overproduction of crops, prices decreased. Manufactured goods had a similar issue. More and more events led to the decline of the stock market, such as high tariffs due to the Smoot-Hawley tariff, bad banking practices, poor investments, income inequality, and the decrease of stock prices. Then, on October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. The day became known as Black Tuesday. Hoover did little to combat this severe depression that later became known as the Great Depression due to its severity. His belief in laissez-faire and trickle-down economics did not help the situation whatsoever. In case you are wondering, trickle-down economics is when the government lends money to the banks and hopes it will eventually reach the people. Hoover did exactly that, yet was unsuccessful. During the Great Depression, unemployment rates skyrocketed, and people who were unable to make money and pay rent often visited soup kitchens and built Hoovervilles, shantytowns, or a group of makeshift shelters that were built out of whatever materials were accessible and housed the debt-ridden, unemployed, and mostly the homeless, named after President Hoover, who was in office during the crash. Hoover ran again for presidency in 1932, but was defeated massively by the Democratic ticket, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Moving away from the Great Depression, new inventions improved the 1920s greatly. Airplanes allowed faster long-distance travel, trucks carried perishable goods across the country, the assembly line allowed more goods to be produced at a lower cost, motion pictures entertained Americans, and, most significantly, a new media was established, the radio. The radio allowed news to be transmitted on a wide scale and was listened to in various places at once. It spread news, entertained many with radio shows, played music, and gave people the ability, for the first time, to hear the president's voice. The radio revolutionized the Roaring Twenties and was the most impactful technological advancement of the time period. Since now you, hopefully, have an understanding of the Roaring Twenties, I will continue with comparing them to the 2020s. I'm sure you are aware of a majority of the events of the time period we are currently in, but to satisfy my lust for saying more than necessary, I will continue to explain the events of the 2020s similarly to that of the Roaring Twenties. I shall begin with the year 2020 since, thank goodness, we did not deal with a world war. Similar to the Roaring Twenties, the 2020s began with a Democratic president, Joseph or Joe Biden. He assumed the presidency in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and an economic crisis that was quite bad but nearly not as severe as the Great Depression. As politics work, one of the contributing factors that led to his election was the poor economy during the Trump administration, since when the economy is bad, the people, yes, they blame the president. Fun fact, I actually watched former President Biden's inauguration on January 20th, 2021, while in history class. It's a completely useless fact, but whatever, thought I'd mention it. During Biden's administration, he had lowered the cost of prescription drugs, which benefited the elderly in American society and those with many medical issues, signed a gun safety bill, possessed the same anti-isolationist policies as President Wilson 100 years prior with aid to Ukraine and strengthening America's allies, and did so much more. Not much is documented on the resources I use to gain information. Disclaimer, I do not remember a majority of 2020 besides Biden getting elected president and the coronavirus. It was 5 years ago, and I honestly tried to block that year out of my head. It's surprising that I have to research this more than the events that happened literally slightly less than 100 years ago. Towards the end of his term as president, many were concerned for Biden's mental state. He had shown signs of dementia, and, at the time, was the oldest president in office and had aged considerably. Many deemed him incompetent of governing the nation in this state. Some believe that during this period of time, former President Barack Obama was making a majority of the decisions, and Biden was just his puppet and enforced them. I don't know if these allegations were true, but what is certain is the inability to serve the nation of America the best one could possibly do was common amongst both Woodrow Wilson and Joe Biden. Next is prohibition or lack thereof in modern American society. The 18th Amendment, which prohibited the consumption, manufacture, distribution, and selling of alcohol, was repealed and the government no longer had the ability to ban alcohol. Certainly, there are dry or having no alcohol and prohibiting it cities in the United States, but it is up to the state or city government to decide, and is not a federal concern. In order for the federal government to gain the ability to ban alcohol nationwide, another constitutional amendment must be passed. Now we move on to the breaking of gender boundaries and social norms in modern-day America. Some may find what I'm going to say somewhat offensive, and I do not intend it that way. I'm a supporter of the LGBTQ+ community and do not mean to offend anyone. If you would like, skip to the time I have on the screen. Thank you. That was my public service announcement for the day. As shown in the 1920s with the flapper, gender boundaries and social norms were broken in the 2020s. In the current era of the 2020s, the flapper would be equivalent to transgender and non-binary Americans and perhaps other members of the LGBTQ+ community as well. They break traditional social norms, according to many people, and about 3/4 of those people oppose them. The discrimination against them now is significantly more profound compared to the negative backlash the flappers received in the 1920s. Ah, yes. Republicans in office. Immediately, the current president of America, Donald Trump, comes to mind. He is obviously a Republican and is like the new Andrew Jackson. Jackson and Trump have similar personalities, and you either hate or love either of them. Traditionally. My opinion of both of them are different, but as for Jackson, I'm defying standards, and I'm kind of in the middle, leaning towards hate, since I would like to know more about him before I make a final judgment. As for President Trump, you'll just have to use context clues. Trump shares similar qualities to Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover. Yes, all of them. He is pro-business, and if he isn't, I honestly don't know who is, along with Harding. He possesses similarities to Coolidge by being mostly neutral in foreign affairs. Mostly. Like Hoover, Trump raised tariffs and seems to do things similar to trickle-down economics, but without the economic part occasionally, like passing an act or increasing tariffs that have no immediate benefit but may benefit in the long run. President Trump also seems to be trying to be the new Grover Cleveland, who was the 22nd and 24th president, who was the first to have served 2 non-consecutive terms, and was for a long time the only. He also somewhat resembles Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, in his progressive ideas and policies, but more specifically when he enacted them. FDR immediately took action at the beginning of his administration to combat the Great Depression, which was 1929 to 1939, and passed various policies throughout his presidency, 1933 to 1945, to eliminate any chances of a future depression of that severity. Whereas Trump took being back in office as a free-for-all and claimed he did more in the first few days of his administration than the Biden administration did in 4 years. Whether or not that is true, I cannot say. So, moving right along. This has nothing to do with a Roaring Twenties president, but he and Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th president from 1901 to 1909, had an experience while campaigning that made them seem somewhat larger than life by many people. Former President Roosevelt was running for a third term against William Howard Taft, deeming him a traitor to the Republican Party, which both men belonged to until Theodore Roosevelt created the Bull Moose Party, which he was now running as, and Woodrow Wilson in the election of 1912. While making a speech, he got shot near his heart, yet continued making the speech. Once Roosevelt was finished his long oratory, he told his audience that he must have medical attention since he had gotten shot some time ago, unbuttoning his overcoat to show a blood-stained shirt. It had turned out that due to a bunch of paper and a metal case for his spectacles, the bullet did not reach his heart and did no harm. Roosevelt seemed like a larger-than-life politician and gentleman prior to this, but this certainly enhanced it. As for Trump, he got shot in the ear while speaking, and all we got out of that was a picture. People pretending to have a similar wound on their ear, and people voting for him. As for the technological advances of the 2020s, I would say some inventions are useless, but the radios of the time period would be social media for communication and entertainment. Yet AI certainly has a huge impact on modern society. Well, both did, for that matter. Beginning with social media. Like the radio, as previously stated, it is a new way for Americans to be entertained and communicate. I'm using social media right now, and you are too, watching this video. Presidents, politicians, or candidates for an election nowadays use social media to convey messages onto their people. But it's very different from the radio since you can not only hear what is happening, you can see what is happening on the screen of your device. The quality of the sound for social media and, quite frankly, everything on your device is better now than it was in the 1920s radio, as to be expected. Moving along to AI, or artificial intelligence. AI has gotten more popular and more powerful in the last couple of years, and you can do so much with it. Students in my class use it to write papers and do homework. It got so bad that one of my teachers invested in an AI detector or something like that. I personally do not use AI to write papers or do any sort of homework unless I am stuck on a math problem. I take pride in writing and enjoy it very much, so there's no way AI will write something for me. I wrote this 21-page script after all. AI also took various people's jobs, like those self-checkout registers you see or kiosks you can use to order food, and will continue to do so as time goes on. You can use AI for fun in various ways, and it honestly should stay at that, not taking jobs from the American people. As time continues, artificial intelligence will get more and more out of hand, so make sure you use it properly. In conclusion, the Roaring Twenties are, indeed, similar to the current era we are living in right now in America. From the president at the beginning of both eras to the breaking of gender boundaries, Republicans in office, prohibition, or lack thereof, in American society, and the impact of technological advancements, they resemble each other greatly. History does repeat itself, as shown here, and I absolutely hope we won't deal with what comes after the Roaring Twenties, a global depression and a world war. At least due to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a severe economic depression in American society is no longer possible. We shall only know when the time comes. On a much better note, I hope you enjoyed the video, and farewell. Bye! Hoover did little to combat this severe depression that became known as the Great Depression due to its severity. His belief in laissez-faire and trickle-down economics did not help the situation whatsoever. That sentence kind of sounded weird. I'm going to say that again. Airplanes allowed faster long-distance travel. Trucks carried perishable goods across the country. The assembly line allowed more goods to be produced at a lower cost. Since you been gone, I can breathe for the first time. ASMR, yeah. I'm sure you are aware of a majority of the events of the time period we are currently in, but to satisfy my lust for writing more than necessary, I will explain. I'm going to say that again. Dementia? dementia. It's dementia. Stories about how to finish his long oratory. He told his audience he must have... have an itch. As for the technological advances of the 2020s, I would say some inventions are useless, but the radios of the time period would be social media for Oh my gosh, I cannot speak. But it's very different from the radio, since you can not only hear what is happening, but you can see what is happening on the screen in front of your... In conclusion, the Roaring Twenties are, indeed, similar to the current era. I'm going to have some water and then re-say that because I sound like I'm sick. I've been talking and singing so much. In the current era of the 2020s, the flapper... Why did I have a voice crack? The 31st president, Herbert. The 31st president, Herbert. I keep saying Herbert. It's Herbert. Is an experienced welcome. What? This has nothing to do with a Roaring Twenties president, but he and Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th, blah, blah, bad an experiencing volcano. Okay.